Our first stop is the Whitney Museum. We will be looking at their exhibit of Mexican mural art.
The Whitney was a brownstone on A Street, and it was shoved in between a group of brownstones. And now we're actually fully freestanding, and we had 2,000 works when we moved in. Today we have 22,000 works. Building a building of any kind in New York is so complicated. This piece of land, which was owned by the city, and the idea that you have horizontal space, just a big open space to build something on.
This exhibition is really rewriting art history. There's been the common assumption that the French were the influence on American art during the first half of the 20th century. Vita Americana changes that narrative to show that it was the Mexican artist that had the most profound, pervasive influence on the art of this country.
I like to say that if it weren't for people like Orozco and eventually Siqueiros, we wouldn't have the Jackson Pollock that we all know and love.
The High Line. This historic, elevated railway is now known as New York's Park in the Sky. It's a mile and a half of meandering pathways, lush plantings, and dramatic design cutting through the heart of the meatpacking district in West Chelsea. But the High Line was once a bustling railroad, part of the industrial fabric of Manhattan's West Side. In the 1800s, railroad tracks ran down the West Side waterfront, bringing goods to the factories and warehouses. The streets were crowded and the trains were dangerous. They caused so many accidents that 10th Avenue was nicknamed Death Avenue. The railroad hired men on horseback to ride in front of every train. Each waved a red flag to warn pedestrians out of the way. These men were called the West Side Cowboys. Trains in the High Line carried meat to the meatpacking district, baking supplies to the National Biscuit Company or Nabisco, now Chelsea Market, and many other goods to the West Side. But within just a few decades, more and more freight began to travel by trucks on the new interstate highway system. The last train ran down the High Line before Thanksgiving in 1980, carrying 3 boxcars full of frozen turkeys. After the train stopped running, the High Line sat, unused, a rusty monument to the West Side's industrial past. On top of the tracks, nature began to take over. The wind blew seeds in from across the river, and birds dropped others onto the railbed. Some of these seeds took root, grew, died, and decomposed. A layer of soil built up, and as the years passed, a strange, unlikely wilderness took hold.
John, coming to you from Chelsea Market, one of the most famous places to grab a bite in all of Manhattan. So we're going to find out, is Chelsea Market really worth it? This place has dozens of different eateries.
It smells amazing as you're walking through Chelsea Market.
How about a taco? $3.50. Do you think this is the best hot dog in New York? Do you have to say that because you work here?
No, I don't have to say that because I work here.
So good.
For $6, you get these 6 little donuts, chocolate cereal and cocoa flavor. And this actually used to be the factory of Nabisco, where the Oreo cookie was invented.
That's crazy.
Yeah, this is by far the most popular food market in New York City.
Next, we are going to the new museum, known for showing the work of living artists. We will be viewing the art of Jordan Castile and Peter Saul.
I am Jordan Castile. I am a painter living and working in Harlem, New York. After I read Bell Hooks' The Practice of Freedom, I was immediately drawn. Within the first 3 pages, I was like, this is exactly what I try to bring in the classroom. It felt really affirming. Then I had been making these paintings. It was the perfect kind of title and language keeper of the things that I'd already been feeling. It allowed me to find a reference point for the things that I had been experiencing in the classroom with my students up until that point. All of the paintings are based in photography. So they start with me photographing a subject or a place or a person and then bringing those photographs back to the studio. So in the large portrait paintings that feel like the gaze is directly upon the viewer, those are usually direct engagements between me and the subject with my camera. I first painted James in 2015 when I was an artist in residence at the Studio Museum. He was seated in front of Sylvia's restaurant where he was selling CDs at that time. And there was a light that just shone on him like I've never seen a light shine on anyone in my life. And I was still too much of an introvert and terrified to approach him, my first walk by him. And as I walked by him, I realized I had made a grave mistake, that the world had literally handed me a painting on a stick and I had turned it down. And I needed to go back and accept that painting on a stick because it had the potential to change everything. I just didn't know how much.
Hello, my name is Massimiliano Gioni. I'm the artistic director of the new museum. Jordan Casteel's paintings are often larger than life, and her work tends to monumentalize the life of individuals, many of them people in her own community, people she has encountered on the streets of Harlem or has encountered in her life, and present them in paintings that have, on one hand, the informality and the liveliness of snapshots, and on the other, the frontality and monumentality almost of ancient portraiture. Paintings are particularly powerful in the way they present also a sense of quietness.
Since the 1960s, Peter Saul has been creating a kind of ongoing portrait of America at its sort of deepest, darkest level. At 85 years old, I think there's no sign of him stopping, and I think we all look forward to the kinds of paintings he's going to make as we try to reimagine what America is and can be at this really challenging moment in time. And so, Peter really struck upon his own style of pop art that he developed kind of independently. He would take, images of consumer products in his own kind of warped, surreal sort of style. American artists like Andy Warhol, Roy Lichtenstein were, hitting upon their own vision about how pop art could channel American culture. Eventually he found out that pop art was happening, and he was kind of disappointed because he really thought he had struck on something completely original at the time. But I think over time he's started to become acknowledged a kind of hand-painted pop, as it would come to be called. As he said, kind of thumb his nose at kind of acceptable kinds of painting, which borrowing from kind of unacceptable forms of inspiration. Early, works you see Superman. But in the mid-1970s, he started looking at specific paintings and doing his own kind of Peter Saul versions of them.
This was inspired, by the way, Custer's Last Stand was inspired by a visit to the Buffalo Bill Museum, which I forget where it is. It's near Reno, I think. There was a painting there of Custer's Last Stand by an artist who'd done an enormous amount of research into where everything actually was. And the painting was so boring that's actually what gave me the idea of just making it up. I suddenly realized the history painting itself is better off if you don't know anything, if the artist doesn't know anything. The more the artist knows, the deader it is. Here's icebox number 9. This is a little more formal looking. It's got a rather large toilet in it, though, right in the middle. Why did I put the toilet there anyway? I think with the idea initially at this stage of my life, which I was very young, of course, is to insult the respectability of modern art. It was already a church-like affair with people going into museums and staring silently at large expanses of nothing, in my opinion. So I definitely wanted to insult that idea. Conclusion, paintings are simply not painful unless they fall on you.
Surprise! We're going to have ice cream before we head home.